David and I began building our own house, and it seemed like the first real step towards freedom, the first breath of air after years of stifling cohabitation with his mother and sister. But the joy I felt was almost immediately met with a heavy shadow. "It's too big for the two of you," David's sister Inez said sarcastically, as if she already considered herself the mistress of our future walls, and his mother, Beatrice, only added fuel to the fire. "I think my wing is already included." David and I froze, as if we had been caught red-handed, but when they tried to talk about the house supposedly belonging to them too, fear flashed across their faces for the first time, because at that moment I asked directly, "What's going on? Where is the house? Whose is it anyway?" "My name is Christina. I have been married to David for 5 years, and all this time we lived in a tiny apartment where there was no room to move around, but there was privacy, peace, and the feeling that the walls belonged only to us." This fragile happiness ended 3 years ago when Beatrice, his mother, offered to move in with her. She called one evening and stretched out her heavy, pitiful voice into the receiver. She was lonely now because her youngest daughter Inez had gotten married and moved out. The house was too empty, the rooms were empty, and she, the poor woman, ate alone, went to bed alone, and there was no more laughter in her house. I listened to her and felt a cold squeeze in my heart because we had always had a difficult relationship, and I knew that under her pity there was a habitual desire to control. She never accepted me, always found a reason for subtle jokes, could hang in a painful silence, and her gaze, sliding over me from top to bottom, seemed to be looking for every crack, every flaw. But David said, "She is alone. It is difficult for her. We can help and at the same time save up for our house." And I gave in, realizing that he had a kind heart, and agreed. At first, everything looked like a pleasant change. Beatrice seemed to play the role of a caring hostess. She brought us coffee in the morning, baked pies for no reason, called me darling. And I tried to believe that maybe our relationship would change after all. But this ostentatious kindness did not last long. After a few months, her behavior began to resemble a monarchy, where she is the queen and I am a servant, obliged to look after the whole household, despite the fact that I worked full-time. I came home tired, but still washed the dishes, did the laundry, cooked, and heard complaints in response. Either her knee hurt, or the night was hard, or she was tired after the store, although I was the one carrying the bags into the house. At dinner, she would comment on my dishes with a wry smile. "Are you putting cumin in this?" "I'm not sure it's good for mature digestion." Sometimes she would push the plate away and sigh quietly. "It's okay, darling. I'll just have toast later." And when David was around, she seemed to put on a mask, became soft and polite. But as soon as he left the door, her voice changed. "Do you really think you're good enough for him? 5 years, and still no grandchildren. The clock is ticking, darling." I tried to brush it off, but it was like a slow drop eating away at a stone. And then Inez began to appear more and more often. At first, once a week, then more often, and her visits turned the house into a battlefield. Noise, chaos, slamming doors, the child's screams. She would hand me the baby without even asking, "He loves you. Just make sure you don't let him sleep too long, okay?" Mom and I are going to the mall, and she would return a few hours later, throw her purse on the sofa, and throw me a casual glance. "You look tired. Do you get enough sleep?" "You need to use night cream." And if Beatrice used words, Inez did it cheerfully and brazenly. When I once noticed that money had disappeared from my wallet, she just laughed. "Relax. You don't bring in much money. David is doing well." I clenched my teeth and said, "I work too." And she, slightly curling her lips, replied, of course, but be honest. He will be paying the mortgage, not you." I told David. He sighed heavily, promised, "I'll talk." But either he didn't, or they didn't care. And one day, unable to bear it any longer, I got in the car and drove to my parents in Loveland. 2 hours of driving, and finally, silence, peace. Dad in the garage fixing something, Mom serving coffee on the porch, and in this simple comfort, my heart broke. At dinner, I laid it all out. Mom squeezed my hand, her gaze full of pain, and Dad was silent, looking at his plate. Then suddenly, he said, "Remember the lot by the lake? The one we held on to for so long?" I nodded. "It's yours. If you want to build, I don't want to see you humiliated." I froze. "Are you serious?" He smiled. "Of course, you're our daughter." That evening, I told David. His face went from shock to thoughtfulness to relief. "Let's do it. We've waited too long. We need our own home." I hugged him tighter than ever, and within a week we were looking for contractors. We didn't tell Beatrice or Inez, or even his father, Frank. We sat at the table in the evenings, drawing plans, arguing about where his office would be, and my coffee corner, laughing, leafing through catalogs. And then one evening, we were discussing the kitchen when a voice behind us said, "Don't forget to add a guest room for me." And Inez would like a separate entrance. We froze. Beatrice was standing in the doorway, holding water in her hand, her arms crossed, looking as if she had uncovered a conspiracy. She sat down opposite us, as if for a meeting. "The house you're building. Do you think I didn't notice your phone calls and sketchbooks? David, I raised you better." I tried to keep my voice calm. "We were going to tell you when we had decided." But she just narrowed her eyes. "Of course we were. But since this is on Christina's parents' land, I want to be sure I'm not forgotten," David said firmly. "You're not moving. This is our home." My mother's smile disappeared, and the glass in her hand shook. "After everything I've done? After letting you live here? Feeding you?" David snapped. "You humiliated my wife. This isn't about you." She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with venom. "It's your influence." "You poisoned him," I said quietly. "I'm just trying to keep the peace." But her hand was shaking and her voice was icy. "You'll regret this. I promise." She stood up and walked away without looking back. I looked at David. "She'll come up with something. I feel it." He nodded, serious as ever. "Then we'd better be ready." After that night, Beatrice didn't say a word about our future home, as if the whole scene with threats and accusations had dissolved into thin air, and the silence lasted for about 3 days. But it was in that wary pause that I felt that she was carrying something, like a cat ready to pounce. And then the gifts began, which became more and more intrusive with each passing day. In the morning, I found fresh flowers in an expensive vase in our bedroom, although I knew for sure that nothing had bloomed in her garden for a long time. A brand new coffee machine suddenly appeared in the kitchen, and in the evening a pie was on the table, which Beatrice, with a satisfied smile, called her creation, although I recognized the branded packaging from a local bakery nearby. She even ironed David's shirts, carefully hanging them up in the closet, and folded my towels in neat piles. But all of this mysteriously smelled of her heavy perfume, and this turned these gestures of care into alarm signals. I couldn't resist asking David, "Is this her way of apologizing?" He shrugged gloomily and muttered, "She's not apologizing. She's manipulating." I agreed because I knew that was how it was. But even stranger was the sudden softening of Inez, who suddenly began to come not empty-handed but with real food, offered to help me with the dishes, and once even thanked me. "Thank you, Christina. You're so good with children." Goosebumps ran down my spine because this phrase sounded like a line from someone else's script, too unnatural, too unusual for her tone. Then one morning, Beatrice knocked on our bedroom door, holding a mug of coffee and smiling so saccharinely that she looked like she was in a Hallmark Christmas movie. "I thought maybe we should take a little drive out to your new place," she said. "Inez and I would love to see how things are going. Just a quick visit, you know." I blinked and told her that construction had only just started last week and there wasn't much to see, but she waved it off. "I'll feel better when I see it for myself." And without waiting for my consent or David's objection, She and Inez were gone. 2 hours later. My husband and I looked at each other and I whispered, "I told you she was up to something." He nodded. "I know." "We just don't know what yet." That day, Beatrice returned beaming, her face triumphant, and Inez followed her, wearing sunglasses and holding a paper cup of coffee, as if she were holding a trophy. "It's huge," Beatrice announced, throwing her purse on the floor. "Much bigger than I thought." And Inez added without embarrassment, "I chose the place for the nursery." I almost dropped the plate I was washing, and David asked sharply, "What?" Inez took off her glasses and said without a trace of embarrassment, "We assumed that you were building with a family in mind. The house is too big for the two of you." David frowned and answered firmly, "We have plans, and none of them include you living there." Beatrice pressed her lips together but did not argue, only smiling tensely. "Well, we'll see." A few days later, the contractor called David to say that someone had asked for a change in the design on his behalf, adding a room for the mother-in-law. David was furious. "It was them," he said, and immediately changed all the permits and contacts so that only he could approve anything. And 2 days later, we found a handwritten note under our bedroom door. "Families support each other. We don't ask for much. A roof, a little space. After everything we've given you, is it so difficult?" Beatrice's handwriting was all too familiar. At dinner that evening, Beatrice cleared her throat and turned to us. "I talked to Inez's husband. He agrees that she needs a more stable place, closer to her mother. He doesn't mind her moving temporarily." David frowned. "Where?" She answered with a serene smile. "To a new house, of course." "It's better for the child." I put my fork down and said quietly but firmly, "You can't be serious." Beatrice nodded. "Oh, but I am serious. Besides, Inez is pregnant again." The last words hit me like thunder. I turned to David's sister. "Are you pregnant?" She smiled. 12 weeks, she added, "and we need to move into your house." I felt my throat tighten, but David stood up and said firmly, "No, we didn't agree to this, and we never will." "You don't have to agree," Beatrice replied coldly. "You're paying the mortgage." "You'll do the responsible thing." "No way," I said, my voice shaking, but I didn't back down. "This land belongs to my family. It was a gift from my parents. You can't decide for us." Beatrice narrowed her eyes. "Who do you think you are? You think you belong in this family? Inez and David are blood. And you?" David stood up. "That's enough. We've let you rule us for too long." One thing led to another. The tension grew until Beatrice slammed her mug down on the counter in anger. "You know what? Fine. If you don't want to share, get out. Move to a motel. This house isn't yours anymore." David stepped forward. "You're the one who doesn't own it anymore, and if it's that important to you, pay the rent yourself." She turned pale, but said, "Or sign the new house over to Inez. That'll take care of everything." My head spun, my breath caught, and Beatrice pointed to the door and said, "Get out." "You're not welcome here anymore." And Inez agrees. David and I started packing that night, and in the morning, while Beatrice was still asleep, we left. David called my father and said, "They're going to try to steal the house. We have to stop the construction." My father agreed, and by midday, everything was stopped. The foundation was in place, but we wouldn't let them go any further. A week passed, then 2. Beatrice didn't answer her calls. Inez wrote a message. "Can we come see the house again? Mom said it's almost ready to move in." We were silent, and then David's phone vibrated. It was a forwarded message from his father, Frank. Beatrice and Inez were in the group. "We'll tell them we're taking pictures. Once we're inside, we'll change the locks. They won't notice. Inez, let's say the child needs stability. That should calm her down, Beatrice, and if not, David will give in. He always gives in." David looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw steely determination in his eyes. "Call your father," he said. "We're taking everything back. After David read the correspondence between Beatrice and Inez, I saw his face turn pale, as if all the blood had drained from his cheeks at once. And at that moment, I understood that he no longer doubted that everything had gone too far, and there would be no return to the previous. He did not scream, did not rush around the room, did not curse, and did not even clench his fists. He simply stood silently for a few seconds, staring at one point, and then said in a low, calm voice, "I will not give them any more chances. They want war. Okay, we will end this." His words sounded so decisive that I had no doubt left. He really intended to put an end to this, even if it meant cutting off the entire past like a diseased organ. David immediately called my father, and I heard them talk for 20 minutes, quietly but firmly, without hysteria, but with that special male stubbornness when a decision has already been made and all that remains is to agree on the details. Then my father made several more calls, to a lawyer, a surveyor, a contractor, and in their restrained voices you could hear that everything was being decided quickly, clearly, as if they had worked out similar scenarios many times. By the next morning, construction was stopped indefinitely. They decided to dismantle and clear away the partial foundation, so that not a trace would remain on the site, where our future home had begun to rise only yesterday. Beatrice and Inez, of course, had no idea. 3 days later, they showed up at the property in a rented SUV, with the smug confidence of someone already mentally choosing curtains and furniture for someone else's house. I watched them from the sidelines, saw them step out in identical sunglasses and heavy boots, as if they were filming a parody of some reality show about renovations, and a bitter thought flashed through my mind. How much time did they spend trying to look like the perfect family instead of actually being one? But instead of a house, they were met only by an empty lot and a freshly driven sign, "Private property. Violators will be prosecuted." Inez turned pale, her jaw dropped, and Beatrice's face turned marble white, like a person who realizes for the first time that control has slipped away completely. They stared at each other for almost a full minute, and in that silence there was more screaming than in the loudest scandals. Then Beatrice took out her phone with trembling fingers and started calling David, but he didn't answer, so she called me. "Christina, what's going on? Where's the house?" Her voice was shaking, but there was still an edge of insolence in it, as if she were demanding an account. "You're standing on my father's land," I answered evenly, "and you don't have permission to be there." She began to make a fussy excuse. "What do you mean?" "We saw the foundations," I explained calmly. "They're gone." We stopped. The construction panic crept into her voice. "What are you doing? Why did you do that? This is our future." I couldn't take it anymore and said coldly, "No, Beatrice. It was never yours. You tried to steal it. You wanted to deceive your son, make him sign something behind my back. You were going to move in here with Inez, change the locks, and throw us out. You thought you could take away what we had built for ourselves." She almost screamed, "You're delusional." "Do you think I would do that?" I answered harshly, "I saw your messages." Frank forwarded them. He was outraged. After a short pause, her voice became quieter, almost pleading. "You don't understand how hard this year has been for me. Inez is struggling. I'm trying to help her, and you're manipulating, controlling, lying. We just wanted to live together as a family." I chuckled, although my lips were trembling. "No, you wanted power and control. And when you lost them, you decided to destroy everything around you." I didn't give her time to answer and hung up. 10 minutes later, David's phone lit up again. This time it was a long message from Inez, full of rambling apologies and despair, begging her to forgive her, to let Beatrice live somewhere, even if not with us. At the end was the stunning, "And please don't write to my husband. He doesn't know everything yet, but it was too late. Her husband had already contacted us himself, and we learned that Inez had emptied her mother's savings, spent thousands on expensive bags and nights out, and was now lying about moving to a new house because he was too emotionally unstable to be a good father. He admitted that he wasn't sure about the child either and had already filed for divorce. Now Inez had no way back. And Beatrice had no home left either, because Frank, finally tired of her years of manipulation, signed the house over to a buyer on the very day David and I packed up and left. The documents had been lying in his desk drawer for weeks. He kept putting them off, but Beatrice pushed him to the decision with her own hands. When she returned home in the evening with a suitcase in her hand, ready to play out another scene of silent punishment, she found that the locks had been changed, and Frank himself was sitting by the door with a mug of coffee. "You sold the house!" she shouted. He calmly took a sip and replied, "You tried to throw my son out." "What did you expect?" She cried out indignantly, "I'm your wife." And he said dryly, "I was. Now you're a stranger." Beatrice's voice trembled. "Where should I go?" But he only silently handed her an envelope with the address of a modest home that she could afford if she stopped interfering in other people's lives. She pushed the envelope away and, instead of accepting reality, began calling everyone in a row: David, me, my parents. No one answered. In the end, she and Inez were forced to rent a tiny one-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. I learned from a friend that Inez had gone back to work as a salesperson in a retail store, and Beatrice had taken a part-time job folding laundry at a dry cleaner. Their union did not last long. After 2 months, Inez moved out, blaming her for everything. Then Beatrice blamed me. David, Inez again. But gradually all ties broke down, and their voices disappeared from our lives. And my father sold that land, not out of spite, but to close the door on that story forever, and use the money to help us buy a new place, far enough away that Beatrice couldn't find it, but close enough that we could visit our parents. David and I built the house we'd dreamed of. No extra wings, no guest suites, no extra rooms, just a cozy space for us and maybe future children, and a big sunny kitchen with a built-in coffee bar where I now drink my coffee every morning in peace, without the fear that someone will try to take my home away from me. One evening, a few months later, I was standing on the back porch with a mug of coffee, looking out at the mountains, their silhouettes blending into the sky in the golds and purples of sunset. David came out to me, put his arm around my shoulders, and quietly asked, "Do you think they'll ever try to come back?" I shrugged. Maybe. But there's nothing waiting for them there. He held me tighter to him, and we stood in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because finally there were no more people left in our lives who were always interrupting us with their chaos.